When I first got the job at Redwood State Park in Northern California, I thought I'd finally found peace. After years of working night shifts in city security, I was exhausted, tired of neon lights, concrete streets, and the sound of sirens. The idea of being surrounded by towering trees, the scent of pine, and the sound of wind through branches sounded like therapy. The position was for a night ranger, a solitary post that involved patrolling the trails, checking for trespassers, and monitoring the wildlife. I imagined it would be quiet, maybe even a little lonely, but nothing I couldn't handle. I didn't realize until much later that solitude and silence are not the same thing. On my first day, I arrived early to meet the senior ranger, Dale. He was a man in his 60s, with a beard that looked like it had been growing since the Reagan administration. His uniform was faded, his face deeply lined, and his eyes had the dull watchfulness of someone who's seen things he'd rather forget. He didn't smile when I introduced myself. He just nodded and handed me a clipboard with laminated papers, rules, and procedures. "Read those carefully," he said. "Especially the second page. That's where the real rules are." The real rules. That's what he called them. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured it was just some park tradition or maybe a set of old superstitions passed down through generations of rangers. But when I finally got around to reading them later that evening, my hands went cold. They were simple, short, but wrong in a way that made my stomach twist. Rules for Night Ranger, Redwood State Park. 1. Patrol the main trail every hour, on the hour. Never go off the path after midnight. 2. If you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. 3. If you find an open tent with no one inside, zip it closed and keep walking. 4. If you see a woman in white between the trees, turn off your flashlight and stand still until she's gone. 5. At exactly 3:17 a.m., you will hear knocking on the ranger cabin door. Do not answer it. 6. Never, under any circumstances, look up into the canopy after 4 a.m. I laughed at first, thought it was some initiation joke, but when I looked up at Dale, he was staring at me with that same tired seriousness. "You follow those rules," he said quietly. "Every single one. Don't try to figure them out, don't test them, and don't tell anyone else about them. That forest has its ways, and it doesn't forgive curiosity." I tried to joke, to lighten the mood. "So ghosts? Skinwalkers? Bigfoot?" He didn't even blink. "Something like that," he muttered, and then walked away. That night was my first shift. The ranger station was a small wooden cabin perched near the entrance of the main trail. It smelled like old coffee and damp wood. There was a desk, a cot, a radio, and a single oil lantern that flickered weakly even when the power was on. I did my check-ins, filled the logbook, and started my patrol. The redwoods were stunning during the day, but at night they became something else entirely. The trees rose like black monoliths, their trunks vanishing into the dark canopy above. The air was heavy and still. The forest floor was soft and muffled. Every step I took felt swallowed by the earth. Around 11 p.m., I was still enjoying the quiet, the kind of silence you never get in the city. But then I heard it. Something faint behind me. Footsteps. I froze. I turned my flashlight slightly but remembered rule number 2. If you hear footsteps behind you, don't turn around. It was probably an animal, I told myself, maybe a deer or a raccoon. The sound was soft, rhythmic, almost human. I kept walking faster this time, pretending I didn't notice. The footsteps matched my pace. When I stopped, they stopped. A chill crawled up my spine. I whispered into my radio, "Dale, this is Ranger Mason. Anyone else out on the trail tonight?" Static. Then, faintly, "Don't turn around." My heart jumped. That voice wasn't Dale's. It was low, breathy, and came through the static like someone whispering directly into my ear. I clicked the radio off and just walked, straight ahead, not daring to look back until I reached the cabin again. When I finally stepped inside and shut the door, the footsteps stopped outside. Silence again, but the kind that presses in on you. At midnight, I logged the incident, but didn't write down what I'd really heard. I wrote possible trespasser. I was sitting at the desk when I heard a zipper sound outside. It was faint, but distinct, like someone opening a tent flap. I looked through the window and saw a small campsite about 50 yards away, down near the clearing. One of the visitor tents was unzipped, swaying gently as if someone had just gone in. I sighed, grabbed my flashlight, and headed out to check. The clearing was foggy, the beam of my light barely cutting through. When I reached the tent, it was open, completely unzipped. Inside were two sleeping bags, one rolled up, one flat, and a small lantern still glowing. But no one was there. I remembered Rule 3. If you find an open tent with no one inside, zip it closed and keep walking. I stood there, breathing hard, waiting for logic to kick in. Maybe the campers went for a walk. Maybe they stepped away to use the restroom. But the forest was silent. Too silent. Not even crickets. I forced my hands to move, zipped the tent shut and walked away, fast. When I reached the cabin again, I locked the door and poured myself some stale coffee. The clock said 2:55 a.m. I kept checking the window every few minutes, waiting for the campers to come back. They never did. Then at exactly 3:17 a.m. I heard it. Knocking. 3 slow, heavy knocks on the cabin door. I froze in my chair. My breath caught in my throat. Do not answer it. I stared at the handle. It didn't move, but the knocks came again, 3 times louder. The walls seemed to hum with the sound, the lantern flickering in response. Then, a voice. Mason. It said my name. My blood turned cold. I hadn't told anyone I'd started tonight except Dale, and this voice, it wasn't his. It was deeper, rougher. Mason, it whispered again, this time closer, like the person was pressing their lips against the wood. Let me in. I backed away slowly, grabbed the rifle from the corner, and aimed it at the door. The handle twitched once, then stopped. After what felt like hours, the sound stopped. The forest was silent again. At 4:02 a.m., my curiosity got the better of me. I stepped out onto the porch with my flashlight. That's when I made the mistake. I looked up. The canopy stretched high above, lost in the darkness, but something was there, something moving among the branches. Long limbs, pale and thin, gliding from tree to tree with impossible grace. For a second, I saw what looked like a face, a stretched, eyeless thing peering down. Then it was gone. I stumbled back inside, shaking, slammed the door, and waited for dawn. When morning came, the world seemed normal again. The forest was golden and alive with birds. Dale arrived around 8 a.m. and found me sitting on the porch, pale, exhausted. He looked at me, then at the trees. You didn't look up, did you? I didn't answer. He sighed, placed a hand on my shoulder, and said quietly, Don't come back tonight. Let the forest forget you. But I did come back. I had to. Because the tent I zipped closed last night was unzipped again. And this time there were footprints leading from it. Bare footprints. Heading straight toward my cabin. The next night, I told myself I wouldn't go back. I told myself I'd call in sick, make up an excuse, maybe even quit. But around sunset, as the fog began rolling down the mountains, something in me changed. Maybe it was pride, maybe curiosity, or maybe it was that strange whisper that had crept into my dreams all morning, a faint rustling voice that said, You need to see it. I didn't tell anyone I was coming back. When I arrived at the ranger station, the sun was nothing more than a red smear through the trees. Everything looked the same. The cabin, the path, the tall silhouettes of the redwoods swaying gently, but the forest felt different now. It wasn't welcoming anymore. It was waiting. The first thing I noticed was the tent in the clearing. The same one from last night. Still unzipped, but this time the footprints were clearer, bare, human prints pressed deep into the moss. They led from the tent to the tree line, then curved sharply toward my cabin. I crouched to examine them. They were wet, as if whoever made them had been walking through dew or water. And the size, it was strange. The toes were long, too long. The spacing was uneven, as though the walker didn't move quite like a normal person. I stood, scanning the trees. Nothing. The forest was perfectly still. When I reached the cabin, I found a note pinned to the door, written on a page torn from the ranger logbook. My logbook. It said in neat handwriting, You saw her, didn't you? The paper smelled faintly like pine resin. The writing wasn't mine, but it looked eerily similar. Inside, everything was where I left it. The lantern on the desk, the coffee mug, the rifle in the corner. But there was something new, a pile of pine needles in front of the door, as though someone had tracked them in. I swept them away, trying to ignore the pounding in my chest. When the clock struck 9, I began my patrol. The rules echoed in my mind. Patrol the main trail every hour. Never go off the path after midnight. For the first 2 rounds, nothing unusual happened. The woods were quiet. The fog hung low, making everything look softer, dreamlike. But at 11:58, Just before my midnight patrol, I noticed something strange on the radio. Static, faint, rhythmic, like breathing. Then, a voice, half drowned by the noise. "Mason, you shouldn't have come back." I froze, hand hovering over the dial. "Who is this?" I asked. No answer, just breathing. Slow, wet, then silence. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The forest looked wrong somehow. The mist seemed thicker, almost alive, moving in waves between the trees. The beam of my light barely reached 5 feet ahead. As I walked the main trail, I heard something off to the right. Laughter, faint, echoing. A woman's laugh, high and broken as if carried by the wind. I tightened my grip on the flashlight but didn't leave the path. Rule 1, never go off the path after midnight. The laughter grew louder, circling me. It came from nowhere and everywhere at once. Then I saw her. A woman in white, standing between two massive redwoods. Her dress was tattered, almost transparent in the mist. Her hair hung long, damp, hiding her face. I stopped breathing. Rule 4, if you see a woman in white between the trees, turn off your flashlight and stand still until she's gone. My thumb hovered over the button. Every instinct screamed to run, but I clicked the light off. Darkness swallowed me. The sound of the forest shifted. The laughter stopped. Then came the creaking of wood, the deep, stretching groan of trees moving in the wind. But there was no wind. Something was walking. Slow, dragging footsteps. The crunch of leaves came closer, closer still. I stood completely still, heart hammering in my chest. Then I felt it, a presence right behind me. The air turned icy. I could smell something sweet and rotted, like flowers left too long in water. A whisper brushed against my ear. "You shouldn't have looked up." I bit my lip to stop from gasping. My fingers trembled on the flashlight. Then silence. When I finally turned the light back on, the woman was gone. The trail was empty again. I ran the rest of the way back to the cabin. The clock read 3:16 a.m. when I got there. My breath caught in my throat. 1 minute until the knocking. I locked the door and stood frozen beside it, counting down the seconds. 3:17. 3 knocks. Heavy, deliberate. I closed my eyes, every nerve in my body screaming to open the door to see what it was. But I didn't move. Then came the whisper. "It's cold out here. Please, open up." The voice wasn't distant this time. It was right outside the door. I took 1 step back. The handle rattled. Then a scraping sound, something sharp dragging across the wood. Slow, long. After a minute, it stopped. I waited another hour before I dared to sit down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I stared at the clock, counting every second until 4 a.m. When it finally came, the forest seemed to sigh. The air shifted, colder now, and before I could stop myself, I looked up through the window. The canopy loomed high above. For a moment, nothing moved. Then a faint shimmer, like moonlight reflecting on something wet. And I saw them. Faces, dozens of them. Pale, eyeless, hanging upside down from the branches. Their mouths open, whispering soundless words, their bodies swaying slightly as though caught in an invisible breeze. I stumbled back, hit the desk and dropped my flashlight. When I picked it up again, the faces were gone. At dawn, Dale arrived. He didn't look surprised to see me, just disappointed. "You heard her," he said quietly. I nodded, too shaken to speak. He sighed and rubbed his temples. "They don't like it when you break the rules. The woman you saw, she's the forest's echo. If she knows your name, you're already marked." "Marked for what?" I asked. He didn't answer. Later that day, I went to check the visitor logs to see who'd been staying in the campsite that night. There was an entry for a couple, Allison and Greg Patterson, who were supposed to leave 2 days ago. They never checked out. Their car was still parked near the trailhead, and their tent, the one I zipped closed, was empty again. But this time, it wasn't just footprints. There was something written in the dirt beside the tent. "She's waiting for you tonight." Sleep didn't come easily after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice, soft, whispering my name through the rustle of leaves. Even when I drove back into town the next morning, I felt it following me, like the forest itself was breathing down my neck. I told myself I'd quit. I even drafted a resignation email. But something inside me refused to hit send. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was fascination. I needed to know what I had seen. Those faces, those sounds, the rules. None of it made sense. So, against every instinct I had, I went back the following night. The sun had barely dipped below the treetops when I arrived. The air was thicker than before, carrying that faint metallic scent that comes just before rain. Dale's truck wasn't there this time. I was alone. When I stepped inside the ranger cabin, I noticed something strange. The door latch had been scratched, deep claw-like marks trailing across the wood. And on the desk, my logbook was open to a page I didn't remember writing. It said, "She likes when you come back." The handwriting was mine. Every letter. My pen strokes, my style, but I didn't write it. The clock read 8:42 p.m. I still had some time before my first patrol, so I decided to check the security cameras. We only had a few old ones, grainy, black and white, set up along the main trail and near the campsite. I replayed last night's footage, and there they were, the footprints, clear as day, appearing one by one in the dirt like someone invisible was walking. Then something moved between two trees, a flicker of white fabric. The woman, she didn't walk, she drifted. For a few seconds she looked straight at the camera. Her face was blurred, but her mouth was open in a wide, that's unnatural smile. Then the feed cut to static. I stared at the screen long after it went dark. My hands were shaking again, and I could feel my pulse hammering in my throat. The forest outside was calling to me, softly at first, like the wind brushing through the redwoods. But the sound wasn't the wind. It was humming, low, human. When I stepped outside, the air felt electric. My flashlight flickered once, twice, then steadied. The trees loomed high above, their trunks vanishing into the darkness. The trail was quiet, no footprints this time, no laughter, just that hum vibrating faintly through the ground. At 11 p.m., I began my regular patrol. My radio crackled with static every few minutes, and at one point I thought I heard Dale's voice. But when I pressed the button to respond, the only thing that came through was faint breathing. Halfway down the trail, I found something new. A shoe. It was a woman's hiking boot, mud-caked and torn, lying just off the path. I crouched, shining my light on it. The tag read A. Patterson, one of the missing campers. My stomach twisted. Then I heard it, laughter again, faint and broken. It came from deeper in the woods, past where the path ended. I froze. The rule echoed in my mind, never go off the path after midnight, but it wasn't midnight yet. I checked my watch, 11:49 p.m., 11 minutes. I could make it back before then. That's what I told myself. So I followed the sound. The trees grew denser as I stepped beyond the marked trail. My boots sank into soft earth, and the air grew colder. I moved carefully, keeping the beam of my flashlight steady ahead. The laughter came and went, bouncing off the trunks like an echo that didn't belong to a single voice. Then I saw her again. She was standing about 30 feet away, half hidden behind a tree. Her dress hung in tatters, her head tilted unnaturally to one side. Her hands were clasped in front of her chest, trembling. "Allison?" I called before I could stop myself. The figure twitched, then slowly it turned toward me. The face wasn't human. It was stretched, almost translucent, eyes black as holes. The mouth opened wide, far too wide. My flashlight flickered violently, then died. The laughter turned into screaming. I stumbled backward, trying to find the path, but the forest around me had changed. The trees seemed closer together, suffocatingly close. Their trunks pulsed faintly, like something alive was moving inside them. A voice whispered behind me, low and sharp. "She knows your name now." I turned and saw nothing, just shifting shadows between the roots. Then, far off, I saw a dim light, my cabin lantern. Branches tore at my uniform, roots caught my boots, but I didn't stop. I burst through the clearing, chest heaving, and slammed the door behind me. The clock read 12:06 a.m. I'd broken the rule. I tried to calm down, gripping the edge of the desk. My whole body trembled. That's when the radio came to life again. "Mason," a voice said. Not Dale's, not the woman's. This one was deeper, hollow, like something speaking from beneath the earth. "You shouldn't have left the path." Static followed, then faint, wet breathing. I turned the radio off and stared at the door. At 3:17 a.m., right on schedule, came the knocking. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I didn't move. But this time, there was more. Something slid under the door, a scrap of paper, yellowed and damp. I hesitated before picking it up. It was an old photograph, faded almost to white. It showed a group of park rangers standing in front of the cabin. The faces were smiling, except one, the man in the middle, whose eyes had been scratched out. Scrawled on the back were 5 words, "They never let you leave." The next morning, when the sun rose and the forest came back to life, I packed my things. I told myself I was done. But when I got to the ranger station parking lot, something stopped me. Dale's truck was still gone, but in its place was another vehicle, a rusted green Jeep, its tires half sunk in mud. The plates were old, nearly unreadable, but I could just make out the letters, Pat Son. Inside, on the driver's seat, was a map of the park. Several spots were circled in red ink, one of them marked Campsite 12, and beside it, written in the same neat handwriting from the cabin note, were the words, Follow the roots. She's underneath. The roots beneath the forest had always felt alive, but now it felt aware. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of bark sounded like breath. Watching me. Listening. I should have driven away that morning. I should have thrown the map into the nearest fire and forgotten about the Redwoods forever. But those words, she's underneath, played in my head like a curse. I told myself I just wanted to find closure. That if I located the missing campers, if I proved something logical behind all this, I could move on. But deep down, I knew it wasn't logic driving me back into the forest. It was her voice. That whisper I'd heard since the first night had changed. It wasn't calling my name anymore. It was humming. Soft, melodic, almost beautiful, like a lullaby. By sunset, I found myself standing at the edge of the forest again, map in one hand, flashlight in the other. The circled spot, Campsite 12, was nearly 2 miles off the main trail, deep into an area no visitor was supposed to enter. I followed the narrow path as far as it went, my boots crunching over pine needles, my breath clouding in the cooling air. The sun disappeared fast behind the redwood canopy, and the forest slipped into shadow. After an hour, I reached what looked like the remnants of an old campsite. Torn fabric hung from branches, rusted tent poles jutted from the ground, and a half-buried fire pit sat cold and gray. I knelt to inspect the dirt and found something sticking out of the soil, a plastic tag with faded lettering. It read C12, Campsite 12. The map had led me right, but the forest was too quiet. No wind, no insects, not even the hum of distant wildlife, just silence so deep it pressed against my ears. Then that sound returned, the humming. It came from below. I knelt, pressing my hand to the forest floor. The sound was faint but distinct, a slow rhythmic vibration like something pulsing under the earth. And then I saw them, roots thick as wrists snaking along the ground, their surfaces slick with moisture. They didn't look natural. They moved, subtly, twitching like veins under skin. I backed away, heart hammering. A whisper floated through the trees. You came back for me. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the dark. She stood a few feet away, her white dress glowing faintly in the beam. Her head tilted, long black hair matted with soil. Allison? I whispered, though I already knew it wasn't her. She smiled, slowly, painfully, and took a step forward. Her feet made no sound. Her mouth opened, and that humming poured out again, low and deep enough to make the ground tremble. I stumbled backward, tripping over a tree root. When my flashlight hit the dirt, the beam illuminated something I hadn't seen before. A hand, half buried. The skin was gray, stretched tight over bone, fingers twisted in the roots like they were holding on for dear life. Then I saw another, and another. Hands, faces, pieces of people tangled in the roots, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. The forest floor moved, the soil rising and falling as though something massive breathed beneath it. The woman's humming grew louder. Her smile widened until it split her face. We feed the roots, she whispered, and the earth opened. The ground cracked with a wet sound, and I fell backward as a pit gaped open where I'd been standing. Roots surged upward, writhing like serpents, coated in slime. I crawled back, slipping, gasping, my flashlight shaking wildly. Beneath me, something shifted in the dirt, massive, unseen, moving toward the surface. The woman tilted her head again, her voice turning to a hiss. Now you belong here too. I ran. Branches clawed at my arms, roots snagged my boots, but I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I reached the edge of the trail, lungs burning, heart pounding so hard I could taste blood. When I finally saw the cabin light through the trees, I nearly collapsed with relief. But the door was open. I froze. I knew I had locked it when I left. Inside, the room was dark except for the faint flicker of the lantern. My logbook lay open on the desk. There was a fresh entry. October 7th to 12 a.m. Ranger Mason fed the roots. The forest is pleased. I stared at the page, trembling. I hadn't written that, but the handwriting, It was identical to mine. Suddenly, my radio hissed to life. Mason, the voice said, warped, crackling through the static. The roots remember. They keep what they take. I grabbed the radio. Who is this? A pause. Then faintly, Dale. My heart nearly stopped. Dale, where are you? What's happening out here? But his voice was distant, hollow. You can't save them. You can only feed her. The radio went silent. I stepped back, the boards under my feet creaking. Then something thudded beneath the cabin floor. Once, twice. Heavy, slow. I held my breath. The knocks came again, harder this time, shaking the lantern on the desk. Then silence, and then a whisper, muffled through the floorboards. She's hungry. I stumbled toward the door, ready to bolt, but stopped when I saw the ground outside. The roots had spread. Thick black tendrils were pushing up through the soil, crawling toward the porch like fingers reaching for me. I slammed the door shut and backed away, gripping my rifle. The knocking started again. Not on the door this time, on the window. I turned slowly. A face was pressed against the glass, pale, smiling, the woman. Her mouth moved, but I heard the words in my head, not my ears. Look up. I didn't want to. I knew the rule, but I couldn't stop myself. My eyes lifted toward the canopy beyond the window, and I saw them again. The faces, dozens of them, swaying between the branches. But this time, I recognized a few. One was Dale. The others were the Pattersons. And then I saw another face forming slowly in the bark, its features still shaping, my face. I dropped the rifle, backed into the corner, shaking uncontrollably. The forest outside seemed to pulse in rhythm with my heartbeat. When the lantern flickered out, I heard her whisper again, right beside my ear. You shouldn't have come back. The storm raged all night, but I barely noticed it. My body was numb, my mind shredded by the things I had seen in the woods. I hadn't slept. I just sat in the ranger cabin, clutching my flashlight and staring at the radio that refused to respond. The forest outside moaned and groaned under the wind, but occasionally the gusts would quiet, long enough for me to hear something worse. Whispers. They came from the trees again, low and murmuring, as though hundreds of voices were speaking just beyond hearing. Sometimes it sounded like my name, sometimes like a plea, sometimes laughter. At first light, I forced myself to leave the cabin. I knew staying there wouldn't help. The backup generator was dead, the main power still out, and the phone lines were gone. I had to find help, or at least find out who else had survived. I packed what I could, my flashlight, my sidearm, a flare gun, and a handful of energy bars. The forest was shrouded in mist so thick that even the familiar paths looked alien. My boots sank into the damp earth with every step. The air smelled heavy, wet bark, rot, and something metallic beneath it all. As I crossed the small wooden bridge near the hollow trail, I saw something lying in the mud. A ranger hat. My breath caught. It had a name tag pinned to it. Reynolds. Reynolds was the first ranger to vanish months ago. I'd assumed he left like the others. But now his hat was half buried in the muck, covered in pine needles. I knelt down, brushed it off, and noticed something odd, a black residue on the edge of the brim. It wasn't dirt. It was thick, tar-like, and warm to the touch. I jerked my hand away, wiping it on my pants. That's when I saw movement in the trees ahead. A tall, dark figure, standing unnaturally still among the trunks. Who's there? I shouted, my voice trembling. The figure tilted its head, just slightly, then vanished behind a redwood. I ran after it. My breath came in gasps, and my flashlight flickered as I pushed through the thick fog. Every tree looked the same, every shadow stretched long and unnatural. Then I reached the clearing, the same one from the night before, but the altar was gone. In its place stood a single redwood tree, huge, ancient, gnarled, and at its base was something new. A hollow, a perfect black opening in the trunk, wide enough for a person to crawl into, and from that hollow came the whispers. They weren't faint anymore. They were clear, deliberate. They spoke my name over and over. Eli, Eli, come home. I staggered back, clutching the flare gun. No, I whispered. No, you're not real. The forest answered with laughter, dry, rustling laughter that spread through the trees like fire. I turned and ran. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to get away from that sound. My legs carried me through thickets and over roots until I burst into another clearing. This one was new, different. The air here was heavy, suffocating. The trees leaned inward, their branches tangled like claws, and in the center of that clearing was a familiar face. It was Maya. She stood perfectly still, her ranger uniform torn, her skin pale and almost translucent. Her eyes were wide, glassy. "Maya?" I said softly. "You're alive?" She tilted her head, smiling faintly. "You didn't follow the rules, Eli." Her voice was calm, too calm. "You shouldn't have gone to the hollow." I had to. The power? People are missing." "They're not missing," she interrupted, her tone darkening. "They're here. They're part of the forest now. That's what it wants." What wants? She pointed to the treetops. "The thing that roots itself in the dark, the heart beneath the redwoods." Her voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw tears in her eyes. "I tried to warn you." Before I could say another word, she turned and began walking toward the deeper woods. "Maya!" I ran after her, but the mist thickened, swallowing her shape. When I reached the spot where she'd been, there was nothing, just a patch of disturbed soil and a faint humming under the ground, like something pulsing far below. Then my radio crackled to life. "Eli, do not enter the hollow. Repeat, stay away from the..." The transmission cut off. My heart pounded. That voice, it wasn't dispatch. It sounded like Reynolds. I turned toward the trail leading back to camp, but every path was wrong. The signs were twisted, pointing in different directions, some even hanging upside down. The forest was changing. That's when the first scream came. It echoed from somewhere behind me, sharp and human. I spun around, flashlight trembling in my hand. The sound came again, closer this time. I aimed my light at the trees and saw her again, Maya crawling on the ground, her hands covered in that same black tar. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. I rushed forward to help, but the ground beneath me gave way. The soil collapsed, and I tumbled into darkness. When I hit bottom, the air was warm and thick, like breathing inside a lung. My flashlight flickered to life, revealing what looked like tunnels carved into the roots of the redwoods. The walls pulsed faintly, oozing that same black resin, and there were faces, half-formed, emerging from the roots. Ranger faces. Reynolds. Maya, even Parker. Their eyes moved, tracking me, but their mouths were sealed shut with resin. I stumbled backward, tripping over something soft. I turned and screamed. It was my own ranger jacket, torn, soaked in that black substance, and stitched into the inside collar in fresh, dripping letters was a message: "Welcome home, Eli." The tunnels trembled. The whispers rose into a single deafening voice. I ran blindly through the twisting passages until I saw a light ahead. I didn't care where it led. I just needed out. I burst through the opening and fell into the open air, crashing into the wet earth outside. The hollow tree stood before me again, its black opening wider than before, pulsing, and from within it came the last thing I ever expected to hear, my own voice. "Don't run, Eli. You can't leave. You're part of it now." I backed away, shaking, and fired the flare gun straight into the hollow. The forest screamed. Every tree around me shook violently as red sparks filled the mist. Then everything went silent. The hollow sealed itself shut. The whispers stopped. I collapsed to my knees, gasping, surrounded by the stillness of the forest. The only sound left was the faint rustle of the wind through the redwoods. But as I turned back toward the trail, I saw something carved into the bark of the nearest tree. Fresh letters. Rule number 7, never enter the hollow, and beneath it a new line carved deeper, fresher than the rest. Rule number 8, if you break the rules, the forest keeps you. I stood there, frozen, as the mist began to rise again, and behind me, deep within the trees, the whispering started anew. I woke to the orange glow of dawn creeping beneath ancient treetops. My limbs ached. My mind buzzed. I sat up and found myself at the edge of a creek bed, wet stones under my palms. The forest around me was silent, except for the gentle flow of water. I tried to remember how I got here. One moment I was firing the flare into the hollow. The next I was here, miles from the cabin, skin scraped, clothes torn. My jacket, my entire uniform, was coated in mud, strips of black resin still clinging to the fabric. My flashlight lay nearby, damaged but intact. I rose slowly and looked back the way I'd come. The redwoods stood in silent witness, their trunks stretching high, shadows still dark. But there was something new. The forest looked empty, no movement. Even our usual forest sounds, birds, squirrels, they were gone. With every nerve on edge, I picked a direction and started walking toward what I hoped was the ranger station. My boots squelched in damp earth. My throat was dry. My heart pounded like a drum in my chest. Every so often I'd glance upward, but I dared not look into the canopy. The rule, "Never look up after 4 a.m." echoed in my mind. For so long I had ignored, broken, tested every rule. Now that I was alone, I felt the weight of them more than ever. After what felt like hours, I saw it, a shape in the distance. The ranger cabin. My hope leapt. I hurried forward, but as I drew near, I saw that the cabin was changed. The door hung off its hinges. The windows gaped open. The lamp was shattered. The logbook lay on the porch, pages fluttering in a cold breeze. My stomach twisted. I crept closer. Inside, the floor was coated in black resin, like the forest had vomited it. Footprints of resin-coated bare feet trailed across the floorboards. On the wall, carved deep, was a message. "You were meant to stay." I backed away, trying to gather strength to run. Then my radio crackled, a soft static, then a voice so faint I thought I might have imagined it. "Mason." My heart seized. I pressed the transmit. "Who is this, Dale?" Silence, then a rasp. No escape. The radio went dead. I stepped forward past the threshold and noticed something lying in the dirt by the desk. A photograph. I recognized it immediately. It was the same group photo I had found earlier, the rangers in front of the cabin. But now, in the cracked and torn image, the central figure whose eyes had been scratched out was me. I dropped the photo, stunned. Then I heard the sound, a sigh or a moan coming from outside. I turned toward the window and saw her, standing between two great redwoods just beyond the clearing, bathed in pale light, the woman in white. She raised her arm and pointed directly at me. Some ancient instinct screamed in my mind, "Don't run." But I couldn't help it. I turned and dashed into the forest, away from the cabin, through ferns and underbrush, with her behind me, silent, drifting, always just behind. I stumbled, nearly fell, caught myself against a tree. That's when I saw the roots. They spread from the base of the trees, tentacles of black wood stretching like tendrils, reaching toward me, curling and twisting. The forest was awakening. She appeared in front of me, blocking my path, still glaring with that twisted smile. "You can't leave. You can't leave," she whispered. I fumbled for my flashlight. It flickered to life. I pointed it at her. Her features shifted, her skin stretched, her face flickered with the faces of all the rangers I had seen in roots, in trees, and photographs. She began to dissolve, not into mist, but into a tangle of roots, rising from the earth like a mass of living wood. The redwood's branches overhead creaked. The forest seemed to lean inward. I turned and ran again, faster, through corridors of trees I didn't recognize, the forest twisting, reshaping itself. Roots tugged at my legs, branches clawed at my arms. The humming voice filled my ears, thousands of voices, crying, pleading, warning. I breached a clearing and saw a road, a narrow forest road that led out toward the highway. My heart caught. Could this be the exit? I sprinted for it. As I crossed the road, I glimpsed in the trees behind me dozens of shapes, faces pressed in bark, limbs wrapped in branches, silent watchers. I didn't look back as I reached my car at the trailhead, keys half frozen in my hand. I got in, started the engine, and drove. I drove long. I drove until the road turned from trees to asphalt, until I crossed through a town, until civilization embraced me again with gas stations and streetlights. But even now, months later, I swear I can still feel the forest in my bones. Sometimes at night, I hear whispers behind the walls of my house, soft, low voices echoing my name. I dream of trees closing in, roots pulling at my feet, and her face flickering in my vision, pointing. I went to file one final report at the park headquarters, but when they opened my file, the page was blank. No notation of the missing campers, no mention of disappearance of previous rangers, no record that I ever worked there. I'm left wondering, was it all real? Did I survive? Do I still belong to that forest, even now, miles from those redwoods? One thing I know for sure, the rules were never suggestions, they were warnings, and the price for breaking them is forever. So I live now in silence, haunted, always listening, because somewhere deep in my dreams I still hear her whisper, "Don't leave." The ranger broke the rules, and the forest took him. So if you ever find yourself walking beneath those redwoods and you hear someone whisper your name, don't look back, just keep walking, because the forest remembers and it never lets go. If you like this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and come back for more strange rules that should never be broken.